I didn't even know that Monster Hunter Rise actually came out after Monster Hunter World, but it was only on the Switch, apparently.
In every community that I've participated in, there's always a sizable division between the fans.
Yeah.
These divisions are caused, usually, by the developer. They will release a game in a series that is significantly different than the ones that came before.
This guy is talking about Dark Souls too. He makes a lot of Dark Souls videos.
Some fans will like the change, some fans will not like the change, and some will have mixed feelings. These fans will then congregate into different groups that champion different opinions of what the future of the series should look like. Now, in the Monster Hunter community, it is often the case that Monster Hunter fans don't agree with each other on what the next title should look like. In fact, I think that the Monster Hunter community has many more divisions than is...
I know what it should look like. This is what my opinion is, as somebody who's played it for 3 days. I want it to look like Elden Ring and play like that, but just be Monster Hunter. That's what I want. Yeah. I like the game. Just make another game with better graphics. Just make the same game, but with better graphics, with new monsters. Like, fuck, with better UI. Yeah, true.
Typical. There's the realism and speculative evolution people. The veteran pre-Monster Hunter World fans versus the people that started in World or Rise.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, the biggest and probably most antagonistic groups are the Monster Hunter World fans versus the Monster Hunter Rise fans, despite the fact that they both come from the same generation. Although the gameplay loop remains mostly the same for all Monster Hunter titles, the experimentation between titles created specific gimmicks and aesthetic differences that spawned different interpretations on what the game's direction should be.
Sure.
And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about what the different groups are, what they want out of Monster Hunter, and what caused these divisions in the first place. In order to fully understand the different groups in the community, and why there is such a range of expectations from the fans on what the next title should look like, we first have to look at Monster Hunter's design philosophy, and how the team at Capcom develops their games. Early in the development of the original Monster Hunter, Capcom shifted from a typical fantasy setting into a more grounded setting.
Okay.
A setting that had fantastical elements, but that also had ecologically conscious explanations for those elements.
I think that's a good thing. I like, because like in a lot of games, I think that you should be able to predict kind of like what's happening.
In Monster Hunter Illustrations 1, there are interviews with the development team that discuss this shift in development. The following is a quote from the director. "We had it in our heads that this was going to be a fantasy game, so our ideas tended to gear towards magic and the like.
Sure.
The world as a whole was much more fantastical as well. I doubt any of us expected it to turn out so analog." The lead designer had this to say: "When we got down to the nitty-gritty of what kind of game is Monster Hunter going to be, really, that's when we dropped the whole magic system. One of the earliest concept movies we created showed a few hunters laying traps and luring a monster."
I actually agree with them not really having a lot of magic, because I feel like the idea of Monster Hunter is like the concept of a mere man taking... It's like a David and Goliath situation, where it's like if you're a mage and you can just summon a fireball, it like destroys that illusion. Yeah, it's like man versus nature. I think that's like a really good point. Yeah, it's man versus nature. And so, like, for example, like you can't have a sword that's the size of the sword in Monster Hunter, like the Great Sword. But like a lot of these other weapons, like you do have swords though. You do have hammers, and you have a bow, and you have like a spear. And like these things people used to fight monsters back in the day that were called bears or lions. And I think that's why the game is... That's why the game resonates with people. It's like what I was saying before about how there's like that internal truth, where like if you add in like magic and shit, you lose that internal truth, I would say.
To their traps. In those movies, the monsters were always very generic fantasy monsters, like red dragons. Not only were they archetypal dragons, we also had them climbing out of the depths of ancient ruins, where they had no doubt been napping on a huge treasure hoard. So the game itself didn't have a strong connection to nature at first.
Is the grounding? Yeah.
So, Monster Hunter, early in its development, made a choice to lean away from the generic fantasy they had been working with. This shift...
Somebody says my grandpa killed a Rathalos. The funny thing is that how many of you guys have heard stories from like, you know, your grandpa who knew some guy that shot down like a giant fucking bird. Or saw a giant fucking bird. Yep. Yeah, that's what's so cool about this shit.
Development would become their greatest asset, and make the Monster Hunter game world that we know today. This unique setting allows Monster Hunter to stand out next to other fantasy game worlds.
Yeah.
Looking into the designs of the monsters in the series, we can see that the developers deliberately chose designs that made practical sense in a simulated ecological setting.
Sure, with the goggles.
Quote, "Every monster has a bunch of ideas incorporated into each part of its design, in order to give the player a better sense of how it lives within the game world. For instance, the hard-looking skin on a Lagambi's arms was designed to help it brake and change course while gliding, in addition to being resistant to damage. It would make me happy if
and
players..."
this is a super important positive thing. Like, I am a huge fan of this, because like from my perspective, I think that you should be able to logically deduce weaknesses and vulnerabilities in a game, and playing the game through the lens of like physics and sense should reward you in the game. Like, oh, you want to do a lot of damage to the monster? Hit it in the head. What happens if you hit the tail a couple of times? It falls off. Exactly. Yes, that's what... So, like, it rewards people for being smart.
had fun, wondering why the monster's various parts are designed the way they are.
Yeah,
while
it's supposed to be
actually
like
playing the
that.
game.
No shit.
So,
yeah.
as you can see, the monsters are designed to attempt to be realistic.
Exactly.
The developers are trying to take their natural environment into account, and how that environment might have fueled their evolution. This focus on speculative evolution was always a priority. You can see in this artwork that they were always trying to make a unified family tree, where most wyverns evolved from a shelled lizard ancestor that adapted to various different environments and became those wyverns over time.
I think this is great. Like, I'm a huge fan of this. World of Warcraft did this with the ogres and the Gron, and I really liked it in WoW too. Yeah, I think that having like an evolutionary tree for something like this, and also like what this does is it creates context for future bosses, and also for like a prehistoric boss that's even before this one. Like this, it's super important. And like, it's something that the reason why something like this is really good too is that an average player can play the game and not know anything about this, and it doesn't have any impact or meaning to them. But it's not mandatory lore is my point. But a person who does understand it might have like some other degree of information, right? So like, for example, like this one, you might not think the tail would be vulnerable, but with this one you would. But if you knew that they were evolved from each other, you would probably have an idea, well, maybe I'll try to hit the tail with this one too. So it enriches the baseline experience for a veteran player, while at the same time not being overbearing for a new player.
This is probably not canon, or is at least no longer canon. But the point is, they wanted things to make sense. They were trying to have reasons for why the monsters were the way they were. The following is a staff comment for the Monster Hunter Illustration 1. Even those who do not draw have a set of preconceived notions regarding how a given creature moves.
This is, bro. Fucking exactly. Like, this is why. See, like, this is the thing. Like, the monsters behave intuitively. It's like, yeah, of course he's going to move like this. Well, of course he's going to move his tail like this. Like, this was, for example, this was one thing that I really complained about a lot with Lies of P. Is that I feel like a lot of the movement in that game did not follow the logically preconceived notions that I would have of how something would move in this situation. And I think that, like, having that intuition makes people feel good about succeeding.
That's why we can't really fudge any major point with regards of a monster's physical structure and movements.
Yeah.
If we do, the players are more likely to reject the reality of the monster in question.
Well, it breaks the immersion. You're no longer farming, you're no longer fighting a monster. You're hunting a monster, you're playing a game.
That's why we spend a lot of time not only on the skeletal structure, but also the meat and skin that we put on any given monster. it can be pretty difficult to try and imagine how the skin
and like that's the thing is like whenever I first started watching videos of this game, the reason why I didn't play Monster Hunter at the beginning was because I looked at the videos of the game and the gameplay looked like shit. I still don't think it looks that good, but like there's a certain level of like intuitive, like it looked way jankier than it was. Like, if I just watched the clip of Monster Hunter, I'd be like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I don't know if this makes sense. But then I play the game, and it wasn't like that at all. It was weird, because usually it's like the opposite, right? But, yeah, with this game, that's what it was. It was extremely janky back in the first games. No, I'm talking about when I've seen videos of, like, this game and Rise.
Hang off of a certain fictional creature. But as I look back through the illustrations for the game, I can see how we improved as we went along, and that makes me happy. So here they admit that they were trying to make the monster move in a realistic way.
That's important.
That both its appearance and its movement were a priority.
Yeah.
And they wanted to avoid the player rejecting the reality of the monster in question. One of the best things about Monster Hunter is how it's not just visual and flavor text. These design choices often have gameplay implications. Like the Lagambi's arms, they're more resistant to damage because they were designed to help it stop and change directions while sliding on the ice. Another example that shows that they care about this...
It's also how the monsters attack each other. Like, all these little things just add a lot to immersion.
Even recently is Zitsuyaku. The following is a quote by Fujioka. "We wanted Zitsuyaku to be a grounded monster. That goes for its flash, too, which is different from past iterations, because it doesn't affect the whole field. We made it possible for the player to identify safe areas, because the zone in front of the ear flap lights up while everything behind the monster is safe.
Cocksucker,
We added shells to its nest to increase the flash's effect, so it's a challenge on its home turf. I really like this detail. Zitsuyaku has a inherent inclination to collect reflective shells that increases the potency of its natural weapon when having to defend its home turf. And this is an adaptation that translates into the environment and the gameplay. Hirochika Nagaki in the Monster Hunter Illustrations 2 says, "For the Monster Hunter titles, I try to capture a sense of living creatures in the designs. That's the theme I follow. I take into consideration not just the thought of making them look cool, but also their dignity as wild creatures, and elements that would facilitate play as a game."
I think it's impressive how also, like, they make you kind of feel sorry for the monster as it's limping away, and you're like, nope, I'm gonna still cut your tail off. But you do feel like you're a bit of an asshole. You know, that's impressive. I like that.
To many players, this aspect of the game is so critical that it should be kept consistent and at the forefront at all times. Using Barroth as an example,
I didn't know you could do that.
That monster was designed entirely around its relationship with the environment.
Oh, let's go with the helmet.
It uses the murky, muddy waters to hide from other creatures, but it also uses the mud to protect itself from the heat of the sun. Capcom even went out of their way to provide a pre-rendered cutscene of Barroth's behaviors outside of the limitations of their in-game engine. In the Barroth ecology video, we can see the developer's vision of this fictional animal. And these concepts translate into gameplay. The behaviors that assist Barroth in survival suddenly become combat gimmicks in the player's battle against the monster.
Yeah.
The mud isn't just a fancy visual in a cutscene, and it's not just flavor text in a description. It's integrated into the fight. It coats the Barroth in a protective layer. He slings it around at the hunter to inconvenience him. Quote, "For Barroth's design, I thought of a bulldozer clearing away sand and dirt, and combined it with the motif of a caterpillar's carapace. It was decided that this creature lives in bogs, so I figured that it would approach its prey covered in dirt and mud to hide its body. That's when I put the nostrils on the top of its head so that it could still breathe even when submerged in mud."
Holy shit. They really put a lot into this.
The point is, Monster Hunter has always cared about realism in their designs.
Yeah.
They want the monster...
I think that this is like a core important thing. And like it shouldn't be like this is a big problem that a lot of games have. They think that because you're making a fantasy monster, the fantasy monster doesn't have to behave through like common sense, like physical expectations. But I think that everything should behave that way. I think a really good example of this is like, you know how like Armored Core 6 is a massive super fantasy crazy fucking like what is this, right? But at the same time, the actual like NPCs and the movement in the game makes sense.
designs to reflect its relationship with its environment, and if possible for that relationship to be expressed even in the gameplay, even in the hunt itself. However, Monster Hunter is also not afraid of adding some monsters that aren't grounded in reality at all. In fact, this is a deliberate part of the design process. When asked about the inclusion of blatantly fantastical monsters next to the more grounded ones, Kaname had this to say. When you create a world full of mythical creatures like the Kirin, the entire world starts to feel like a very fantastical place with no basis in reality. Our focus for the world of Monster Hunter was to create a place that would feel like it could be real. By tossing in a decidedly fantasy-themed creature into this realistic world, it made the Kirin stand out in the player's eyes, and we hope that such an unexpected surprise will make the world a more exciting place for them to explore. That's why we made the decision to include creatures like Kirin.
Holy fuck, that is like, bro. Exactly. Fucking exactly. Like, remember what I was telling you guys before? I think this was with, like, I think PAX Day or like some other game, that like 80% of it should be realism, and then the last 20% that's fantasy makes the entire thing fantastical. This is the exact fucking thing.
In a different staff comment, he says, with Monster Hunter 2, we intentionally tried going with a more fantastical feel to our designs, and added new ancient dragon types. We also hope that this new infusion of ancient dragon monsters would help make existing monsters like Rathian and Rathalos seem more realistic as far as this world was concerned. So, the purpose of elder dragons and other less realistic creatures is to provide a contrast. Their inclusion into a mundane world makes that world seem even more realistic in comparison. The elder dragon's fantastical nature is reflected even in the game's lore. To the characters, these archetypal fantasy dragons are so unusual that they can't be categorized as normal monsters. Now, in a different quote, Kaname says, still, we did manage to put together the feline and velociprey while we were working on the larger dragons. When you are dealing with nature and the creation of a natural environment.
Well, also, like, another thing is that all of the monsters are, like, fake, right? There are, like, iguanas that look kind of like the Great Jackass, but not really. Right? I mean, if you actually look at the iguana and you look at this, it's not really the same thing. Like that Oboro thing, the red guy that jumped around a lot that put bleeds on you, there are Komodo dragons in real life, and this shares, like, again, 80% of characteristics of those Komodo dragons, but it's, again, that 20% that it doesn't. And that's what makes it special.
You can't help but fill the empty spaces with smaller critters.
It's a dog? Really? I thought it looked a lot more like a Komodo dragon. Maybe I'm thinking of another monster. But to me, it looked like a Komodo dragon. I meant Gyros? Maybe I meant Gyros. Yeah, I don't remember.
Full, vibrant world with just a bunch of boss monsters. So,
it's
clear that developers had always intended for these monsters to function in a simulated ecosystem with each other. They wanted the world to feel as real as possible. That's why the monsters in Monster Hunter will eat, drink, sleep, and communicate to one another in ways real-life animals do. They aren't mindless evil monsters out to destroy humanity. They are deliberately crafted animals that live and prey on each other in a fictional ecosystem. And it isn't the case that this is just
that's like the whole part. Like, I played through, like, the beginning of the story in this game, and the entire, like, the premise of the story is making sure that some dragon doesn't die in a place that would destroy the ecosystem. And so it even explains to some degree, like, the why these large, like, elder dragons exist. So, like, again, it's about, like, having narrative continuity that's reinforced through gameplay is, like, one of the hardest things to do. But whenever you nail it, it's one of those things also that I think a lot of people don't even recognize. It's something like, you don't even know that it's around you. You don't even know that it's happening, but it makes the experience better.
Something that they used to care about and now no longer do. Because in Monster Hunter World, they doubled down on the simulated ecosystem angle, and the developers pushed to take that concept to a new level. In an interview for World, Sugimoto said the following. Once you've decided on a new concept for the next title, which in this case is a living, breathing ecosystem full of rich interactions between predator and prey monsters and little creatures. The hunters are jumping into this world, but even without you, it's kind of getting on with its own business, being a realistic ecosystem. Now, for the speculative ecology fans, this is the heart of Monster Hunter. This is what differentiates it from its peers. They hyperfixate on these aspects, and they object when a monster...
Well, and it's like also, like, you think about, I think Dark Souls 1 is a really great example, is that almost every single boss in Dark Souls 1 has this exact same, like, premise to it. Like, Ceaseless Discharge, for example. Oh, wow, it's this big fucking fire guy. Holy shit! Where the fuck did he come from? But if you look at the lore, he's actually the brother of the witches of the witch of Izalith, her daughters. And that's why whenever you take and you loot the items that was from one of the witches, it like activates him and he starts trying to attack you. And that's the same as Quelaag, who's also one of those daughters. And that's also the girl that, like, if you, you know, she's like, you can give her, like, the Firekeeper soul. No, you kill her for a Firekeeper soul. And, you know, you have, like, this separate, like, teleportation area down there. Like, that's just one example. Then you have the Taurus demon, right? I think that has, like, I feel like Taurus demons are basically just a way to add in Nosferatu Zod. But, hey, you know, it is what it is. And Calamite, right? And there's like, oh, it's one of the last dragons because, you know, they fought the dragons and there's the War on the Dragons with Gwyn. So, like, you don't really see a lot. Like, really, you think about it, there aren't that many dragons in Dark Souls 1. But whenever there are, that's a big deal, right? Where it's like there's plenty of games, like the impact of a dragon in Dark Souls 1 hits completely different than the impact of a dragon in Dark Souls 2. Because in Dark Souls 2, they're fucking everywhere. They're everywhere. And Seath the Scaleless, yeah, good example too. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I'm trying, like, I'm maybe I can think of like one other, like, I don't know, like, name a boss in Dark Souls, and I could tell you like some lore about it. But the end of the day, a lot of these bosses are very interesting, and the more that you learn about them, the more it enriches your experience. Pinwheel? Oh, Pinwheel, the story for Pinwheel is like really creepy and weird, and that Pinwheel is actually the body of like a man, a woman, and a child all fused together. That's why they're wearing the masks of, like, you know, the father, the mother, and the child, right? It's like a family all fused together, and it was used for like research or something like that. Like, I'm telling you, like, yeah, story's amazing. Yeah, and so, like, all this depth is in the game. And again, like, if you go in and you fight Pinwheel, what the fuck is this guy doing? How he shoot that around? I just go around. Yeah, he dead. Fuck him. Right, that's it. Yorm the Giant. Yeah, Yorm the Giant was like, it's like he was the king, but like his people hated him, but he did it anyway because it was his responsibility, and he had a friendship with Siegfried, and then so finally he gave Siegfried the Storm Ruler. Is that the name? I feel like that's the wrong name, but it's the sword that you use to fight him, and that was given to Siegfried there, and that's why if you interact with him earlier in the story, you can have Siegfried help you fight Yorm. And so, yeah, I mean, Sigurd? Oh, yeah, Sigurd, sorry. Sigurd of Katarina. There you go. And so, yeah, each one of these different characters and, like, the world building enriches the story, and it makes it better. And I think this is something that, it's something for, like, probably 10 to 20% of players, but for those 10 to 20% of players, it like doubles their enjoyment of the game, or I don't even know if it's enjoyment, but it's like fulfillment out of the game.
Design strays too far from that ideal and becomes unrealistic.
I think it's a lot of them.
And so they tend to butt heads with players that don't care at all about that and are just in Monster Hunter for the fun gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
After all, it doesn't matter how a Barroth's body or habits work within the context of a video game, where the objective is to administer damage to the monster.
See, these two things, like, I agree that, like, basically, realism should never come at the cost of gameplay. But in a perfect world, realism and gameplay are one and the same.
After all the work that went into making the ecosystems and world feel living and dynamic, those aspects are mostly irrelevant when you're grinding the same monster a dozen times. The process of creating a fantastical animal is helpful in creating a unique creature design and combat experience, but the details of this process are not important to the player once they're actually playing the game. Or rather, noticing these details and caring about them is optional.
Yeah.
All right.
And also, like, here's a great example. Like, realism is not the deciding variable in this game. I think that the way they design Monster Hunter is they try to make the game fun to play, and then they try to make real-life components of the game congruent with that enjoyment. Because here's the biggest exception. Fall damage. You don't take fall damage in the game. But think about if you were able to take fall damage in the game, think about how many things that would prevent you from being able to do reliably in the game. And so there are a lot of examples of things that you don't you don't get hurt by, and things that don't make sense. So gameplay, in my opinion, again, is always king, but ideally these systems exist inside of the context of gameplay being fun. Because I feel like, again, there's a large amount of fulfillment that a player can get out of being able to overcome a challenge by intuitively understanding the environment that that challenge exists in.
Let's move on and talk about the Monster Hunter World versus the Monster Hunter Rise fans.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we need to talk about the differences between mainline and portable Monster Hunter games. Luckily, what we've already discussed with the speculative evolution fans will be useful because these groups tend to overlap in some places. In broad strokes, a mainline title is a numbered entry. Monster Hunter 1, 2...
It's just like Final Fantasy? Is that right?
3, 4, and Monster Hunter World. We know that Monster Hunter World is Monster Hunter 5 because it was confirmed by Ryozo Tsuchimoto. And he also explains that they changed the naming convention because they didn't want people to see Monster Hunter 5 and think, well, do I have to play the other 4? What if I'm lost?
Yeah.
It was to prevent new players from being discouraged. But though they've dropped the numbering, the system hasn't gone away.
Mm-hmm.
They still release a mainline game and a portable game, and you can determine which is a mainline title by counting the number of dragon heads in the logo. Because Monster Hunter Wilds has 6 serpent heads in the logo, it is Monster Hunter 6. And as further evidence, a while ago there was a leak in Capcom. That leak revealed that internally they're still using the numbered naming conventions for Monster Hunter 6.
Sure.
Now I mention this because the mainline and portable games have distinct qualities. Typically, mainline titles put more focus on narrative storytelling, and by extension the developers also focus more on world building and thus fantasy ecology. Portable titles are less concerned with that. They put more focus on the gameplay loop, experimenting with player actions and their dynamics with the monsters. They tend to be more experimental and disregard previously established norms.
To be honest, I'm kind of surprised that they haven't added a mount system since then. Did they have the mounts, like... Because I feel like that's obviously probably a big deal in this game, right? Is that you have mounts? Has any game previous to this had... Rise has mounts as well, okay.
Norms. Mainline titles tend to have a more nuanced narrative.
Sure.
Focused on character dynamics and uncovering the mysteries of the ecological world. As for gameplay, the mainline titles tend to have slower, heavier, more methodical, more grounded combat. Portable titles tend to be flashier, faster, more experimental. Maybe most critically, mainline titles try to keep the ecological aspects in the forefront. It's incorporated into the overall art direction, and as a result, the art direction will appear more down-to-earth, more mundane, grittier. The portable titles are less interested in that. Both the characters and the locations will be louder and more expressive, and their monster designs are often less interested in adhering to the realism that Monster Hunter is known for.
Okay.
Now, these tendencies I'm describing are not absolute. The design direction of both the mainline and portable games will bleed into each other sometimes, and there are clear exceptions to all the things that I've said. But generally, it is the case that the games differ in the ways I've described. With all of this context, it should be easy to see why there's so much online contention between fans on which direction the series should go. Radically different art direction and gameplay changes between releases will generate wildly different interpretations of what Monster Hunter is and what it should be. When Monster Hunter World released, it was and continues to be its best-selling...
I think there's also like a lot of just Like, what I would assume they also use the portable titles for is to experiment with things for their mainline titles. Because a lot of games do this. Like, they do, like, events or something like that to, like, see, how is this going to work? You know, let's make a game around this and see if, like, is this worth actually putting into the base game? It's almost like PoE seasons, you know?
Game of all time. It jettisoned the series into the mainstream. It's no exaggeration to say that most players were new players that had never touched the series.
That's me.
People that had been with the series for a long time and understood this difference between mainline and portable game were the minority. And so when Monster Hunter Rise was released, it appeared as a departure from everything World had set out to do. Even now, there are a huge number of Monster Hunter World fans that actively dislike Monster Hunter Rise. And even if they didn't outright dislike Rise, they certainly didn't want it going further into the Rise direction. They wanted the next Monster Hunter game after Rise to be more like Monster Hunter World. The real source of this conflict, I think...
I mean, to me, like, I like the way that Monster Hunter World looks way more than this. I don't like the way this looks. I can't really make comments on, like, the gameplay or anything like that, because I haven't done it. But I like the way Monster Hunter World looks, and I like the idea of the game being a living world. I think that's actually very important.
Is that it wasn't clear that Capcom and Monster Hunter would continue in this mainline portable direction. The release of World began the 5th generation of Monster Hunter, and it changed so much so drastically that it made the future uncertain. There was a fear that Rise represented the permanent future of Monster Hunter as a whole, that the games would become much faster, less realistic, less interested in the monster ecology, more interested in rushing you from one fight to the next, and less interested in the preparation and hunting simulation aspect. Now that the trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds confirms that it is in fact Monster Hunter 6, and that they are going to keep the mainline portable distinction, I suspect that the World and Rise fans will have less to be antagonistic over. Alright, finally, the last group is the old Monster Hunter fans, the veteran fans, versus the new fans, which they consider to be people that started in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise.
I mean, I think that there are plenty of anime moments in Monster Hunter World. Like, I'm not even, like, in my mind, like, using some massive fucking sword, smashing some dragon in the head, knocking it down, and then running it down, getting on top of it. Like, this is anime shit. Like, whenever I look at this doesn't look like it's really that much more anime than the other one. Seems the same.
Hunter has been around for 20 years, and there's a vocal minority of veterans that are upset by the overall changes in the game's development since the earlier entries. Older fans have been clamoring for a return to form for a long time, and their group tends to overlap with the mainline fans and the speculative ecology fans. The veteran fans that I'm describing aren't just anybody that likes the old games. It's specifically the people that like the old games and don't like the new ones. They believe that too much of the old design was abandoned with Monster Hunter World, and Rise just exacerbated the problem. They weren't satisfied with Monster Hunter World because they believe that the clunkier design choices of the earlier titles managed to enhance the hunting simulation experience. The technical limit...
I feel like clunkiness in a game... So, a game that does clunkiness the best, and I think that Monster Hunter is up there with this game, is Dark Souls 1. And in a different way, classic World of Warcraft. But, you know, we're talking about action combat games, so I would say Dark Souls 1. Like, Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, I think, like, I like Dark Souls 1 more, but I feel like Dark Souls 3 is a better game. And I think that there's a lot of instances of that where the slow, methodical, deliberate combat of like Dark Souls 1 or something like Monster Hunter, it feels so fucking good to actually get it off. And this is going to be a weird parallel, but tell me if you guys agree with this. It reminds me of PUBG. Do you remember back in the day, whenever you would hit that shot 100 meters out, and you would fucking bop somebody, and because of the ballistics and everything, actually making that shot happen felt so fucking good. And I don't feel good making shots like that in Fortnite. But I think Fortnite's a better game. I do. Like, I feel like, yeah, the ballistics and the clunkiness of PUBG made success in the game feel better. I know it's weird, but I really think that it's the same thing. I think it's the same core feeling. It's a huge ability. Yeah, I really think so. Like, neuron activation, yes. Because it's like, you know what it's like? I said this before, like with Monster Hunter. Shooting somebody with a sniper rifle in PUBG was like pulling a gotcha fucking machine. It's like doing a pull. Like, am I going to hit him? Nope, miss. Nope, miss. Boom, I got a fucking 5-star. We knocked them, guys. We're good. And it would feel so fucking amazing whenever you actually hit those shots. Yeah, I think it's the same thing with the charged greatsword hit. And like, whenever I compare that, getting a charged greatsword combo hit in Monster Hunter is infinitely more satisfying to me than doing a jump attack in Elden Ring. It is. It is infinitely more satisfying. And the reason why is because it's harder to do.
In the old games created specific art directions.
By the way, I like Elden Ring more. It's one of my favorite games of all time. But I'm talking about this specific mechanic. And also, I already have Elden Ring. Like, I'm okay with other deviations of that.
Gameplay design choices that have since been gentrified to keep up with what's considered standard for AAA titles. Players that played the first 4 generations will be fond of gameplay mechanics that are now considered outdated, sluggish, or confusing. They are unhappy with things like the changing or removal of the tracking systems, bug nets and pickaxes being streamlined, the removal of hot and cold drinks, the ability to access your camp to manage your entire inventory after you've departed from a quest. They resent these changes being considered quality of life changes. They don't see them as quality of life changes, they see them as gameplay mechanics that incentivized careful preparation and play.
I think this is always what's going to happen with any game. And I think that one problem that certain games have is they don't... Like, I bet in the first Monster Hunter games, the monsters' attack patterns and behaviors and design was way less complex than it is in Monster Hunter World. That's what I would assume. Yeah, right? And so, obviously, as the monsters become more complex and more difficult, if you maintain the same level of complexity of preparation, all you're doing is just making the game harder and harder and harder. And imagine raiding in retail WoW. If you had to run back to your corpse, you had to do 40-man raiding and not 20-man raiding. You had to have 7 different elixirs on. You needed what the equivalent of Black Lotus is in order to use your flasks. Like, you want to maintain the same level of difficulty, but that difficulty isn't coming from the exact same place. And so the guys that are saying that they like more preparation, I don't think they're wrong in saying that. Like, they're saying we want more preparation and like more character building and less focus on like just being able to do a frame perfect dodge. Sure. I think that's a big argument that people have in another abstract way as classic WoW versus retail WoW. Or like Dark Souls 1 versus Dark Souls 3. And I don't think there's like really a right or a wrong answer for that, but it makes sense to like keep the same baseline difficulty whenever one form of difficulty is getting higher and the other one isn't.
In turn, complemented the monster hunting simulation.
Yeah.
Their main complaint is that Monster Hunter strays further and further into a pure action game.
Mm-hmm.
And the more things are streamlined, the more they push you into going to the monster quickly, then the less room there is for the hunting simulation aspect, which these players value so highly. Monster Hunter's original tracking system involved either wandering around the map when you're new, or understanding the monster spawn locations when you're experienced, and then locating the monster and hitting it with a paintball. The paintball then tracks its position on the map. In World, they replace...
I mean, that's not really as realistic, I would say, either. I mean, like, and that's the thing, is that a lot of times, like, it's very hard to take a lot of, like, arguments for, like, oh, it should be back to the way it used to be. Like, I don't know. I think tracking prints is more realistic than hitting it with a paintball. I think that you should look at, like, what is the core gameplay that made it better? Because there are some cases where, like, people are like, oh, I remember how it used to be. It was better in the old game. That's not always the case.
The system with the Scout Fly system, which still required some level of tracking, but was much less demanding on the player.
Yeah.
In Rise, the tracking system was removed completely, and now the monsters are always visible on the map.
I do think that the tracking system, you know, I don't have any experience in this game near to, like, really have a strong opinion on this. But I could very easily see why somebody would consider this tracking system to be too much hand-holding. Absolutely. 100% I could see why somebody would consider this to have too much hand-holding.
The veteran players were upset with this change because it streamlines a massive part of the hunting process. Similarly, Monster Hunter World introduced a base camp that lets you manage all of your items. This, along with the fast travel to these camps, grants players access to everything they've ever collected, essentially giving them infinite healing, infinite potions, infinite of any material that they've farmed, and completely removes any of the tension you might have experienced by hunting a monster and noticing that you're running low on mega potions, because you can simply disengage and go get more. They also appreciate the slower, more methodical combat.
Are you able to make more because, like, in the new game, the resources in the world respawn. Like, I remember I looted the same thing of honey like 4 times. You can craft on the field. So weren't you able to just farm out the materials in the open world and then come back? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It took time, though.
Found in the older titles. And even how long it takes to heal and how long you're stuck not being able to move while you're doing it. Many of these old systems, like...
I feel like this is... Most deaths in Monster Hunter are like, you get hit once, you try to heal, you get hit again while you're trying to heal, and then you try to heal again whenever you're low health, and then the monster kills you. That's what I've had happen a lot. And, like, I personally don't like losing control of my character. I like how in Elden Ring, in my opinion, has the best Estus Flask system, where you do a drink, but your character just moves at 10% speed, or like 20% of their movement speed, so you don't just completely lose control of your character. Because, like, again, I think that's more realistic. That, like, whenever you're drinking a flask, you can still move your character, it's just slower. You can move in Monster Hunter World? You can. The difference in Monster Hunter World is that it seems to me, and I think this is the way it works, is that the potion is like a channel. So, like, if you get hit halfway through the channel, you only gain half of the healing of the potion. So it's different than an Estus Flask, where the heal is just automatically decided, and even if you get hit while the healing is occurring, the rest of the heal will still occur.
Item management and tracking systems slowed the game down and required the player to put extra care into all of their actions. They needed to be 100% sure they were ready to depart on the quest. The veteran players that enjoy these systems see them as part of the overall game experience that makes Monster Hunter what it is. Now, the interesting thing about this group is that it's not a monolith. Individuals in this group will overlap with these.
If you want my opinion, I think that I think it's much more reasonable that tracking monsters is like too much hand-holding. I think the idea that you have to leave the area to go craft potions and you can't craft them like and like have them automatically like made for you, I don't think that logically makes sense. Because if I think about this logically, you're probably like, I mean, I guess you could have magic flies that would just track the monster. I guess you could have that, but it seems kind of weird. It doesn't make sense to me logically. You can craft. I know that. I'm saying like in the old games that like you can't do that. Or like you can, but you don't have the resources from your stash with you. Maybe I'm sorry, I might be confusing myself. Let me go back. Let me step back for a second and make sure that I'm on point here. So you can craft and make stuff while you're on the mission, but you can't access your stash while you're on the mission. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think being able to access your stash while you're on the mission makes sense, because logically you probably would not only bring 10 potions, you would probably bring extra ones as well. Whereas being able to just have a magical fly lead you directly to a monster seems like way more hand-holding. So like one of them is like actively removing an exploration element from the game, whereas the other one is just simply removing unnecessary time spent in transit. You can craft from your tent? I mean accessing your stash in the old games.
Speculative ecology
Sorry, I might be explaining this badly.
The mainline fans, and even the Monster Hunter World fans. And they believe different things to different degrees. Some want a complete return to tradition, but some just want to get rid of the infinite camp restocks and a more involved tracking system. Some want a general increase in difficulty, and for that difficulty to be scattered across the low rank and high rank and not just centered around the endgame experience. So
I really don't think that you should make the game harder, because for every person that's played every Monster Hunter game, there's a person who it's their first Monster Hunter game. And this is a big problem. Like, a lot of people criticized Elden Ring for this. They said Elden Ring is too easy. What the fuck are you talking about? It's too easy. You've done Soul Level 1 runs of Dark Souls 3. Of course it's too fucking easy for you. What is this? You've been playing this game for 10 years. It's insane. There's got to be new people. Like, if you made every boss as difficult as Melania or like Morgott, for example, with the sword at the beginning, bro, like, people would bounce off of that shit. So as Moog, yeah, Jesus.
Some want the combat to be slower, more methodical, less reliant on counters like Monster Hunter Rise. But many that want that don't necessarily want to go back to Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. They mean Monster Hunter World level of speed. There's even people like me who started in Monster Hunter World, but went back to the older time.
Like, I'll say it for personally, Elden Ring is easy. I think it's the easiest game I've played of like all of the Souls games. And the reason why it's the easiest is because I've already played all the other Souls games. Like, my playthrough for Elden Ring was a joke. I had no problem. I played through Elden Ring 3 different ways. I beat the fuck out of the game every single way because I know every tool. I know everything to do. And so I can say, yeah, I want to have a really hard boss, but I don't need to have the developer do that for me because there are mods that do that. There are, like, you know, there's the convergence mod. There's like other difficulty multiplier mods. There are like random runs. So, like, I don't need to have that happen. Bird? Yeah, no, I had trouble on a couple of bosses in Elden Ring. You're totally right. But other than that, I pretty much steamrolled the whole game.
And can see that they did.
And also keep in mind, I fought the bird on other builds, and it was a joke.
Have things of value that could be maybe introduced in the newer games. Alright, that covers all of the different groups pretty well. My personal opinion is that we're in a very good place when it comes to how Capcom is running Monster Hunter. The fact that they're keeping the mainline and portable distinction, and that they're alternating releases between them, is a very good thing. The biggest division right now in Monster Hunter is between the Monster Hunter World fans.
Somebody, I just want to make sure one thing's clear. Hard games are fine. Developer has a vision for a hard game. There's no issue with that. All I'm saying is that a developer should never, like, it's a bad idea to play an arms race with your player base of the player base gets better and then I make a harder game, and then the player base gets better, then I make an even harder game. Because the problem is that it makes the accessibility into the series a lot harder to get into. That's my point, is that you don't want to get into an arms race with people that play your game 500 hours, making things that are challenging for them. It's like not designing the game around the 1%. Now, of course, there should be a couple of fights that are like that, for sure. But in a general sense, it shouldn't be designed that way. Like retail WoW. Yeah, there you go.
And the Monster Hunter Rise fans, and they also tend to be the most antagonistic to one another. Now that Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out, and it's obvious that it's going to be more like Monster Hunter World, just like the World fans hoped, they, and any fans that overlap with them, no longer need to be afraid that the franchise is moving in a direction that they didn't understand. I suspect that both the World and Rise fans will gain a new appreciation for each other's game.
And it's also like, again, like there were T-Rexes back in the day, and they were carnivores, and they ate animals that looked like these things. So it's like, it's again what I was saying, like the 80-20 rule, where it's like 80% realistic, and it's got that 20% that makes it special.
Now that they can treat the mainline
this
and portable
T-Rex
releases
nowadays,
as
by the
palate
way,
cleansers,
is like a bird.
Instead of viewing them as existential threats,
like in a
they'll
cage.
see them as just a way to pass the time while they wait for the next Monster Hunter game of their preference. Bird. Anyway, that's the end of this video.
It's a chicken.
As always, thank you very much for watching.
Chicken. Chicken, bro. He turned into a chicken. Bro, he's a chicken now. Oh God, man, that sucks. I think about that sometimes. Yeah, this is, by the way, this is a great video. I really like it, and I do think that, like, I think that there is relevance in older players thinking that there's too much hand-holding with the green fairies just telling you where the monster is. Like, am I crazy for thinking that? Like, it's I think there is some validity in what they're saying. Yeah, I get that. I understand that. And some of the system, yeah, everything else, like, I kind of like the I like the new stuff. But imagine gatekeeping green pixels. Well, it's not about like gatekeeping. It's about which creates a more comprehensive and fulfilling experience. It's not about like what's easier or what's harder. Like that's like very, very surface level understanding, I think. Yeah, let me link you guys a video. Make sure to give this a like. Like, this is so good. Basically, to me, what matters the most is gameplay. Like, that is what I care about the most. And then the goal, after you hit like the baseline of gameplay being good, after that, it's how can I make the gameplay congruent with the world? But like, it's not, you don't make the world congruent with the gameplay. You make, you don't make the gameplay congruent with the world. You make the world congruent with the gameplay. The gameplay is what matters the most. The problem with tracking in the old games is that it was non-existent, nothing to look for, no tracks. You would just randomly stumble upon the monster or memorize the zones of specific quests. It was dog shit. I'm not saying that the old system is better, but what I am saying is that I think that there is validity in somebody saying, oh yeah, no, because I think he's right. If that's the way it was, then that's garbage, definitely. But like, there's not two options here. There's no way to find it, and the green fairies lead you to it. Like, there are a million other options you can try as well. That's my point. The glorifies the representation of your hunter's knowledge of the monster's patterns, only leads you to the monster if you've gotten enough information and tracks. No, I understand that. I know that. Like, it's kind of obvious. Search up Monster Hunter Frontier Z gameplay. This is insane level difficulty game, not on par with the main series. You might want to watch it since it's one the monsters made it on Rise. Paintballs are basically useless. You could easily memorize where monsters start off. You still can. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how it's always going to be. But yeah, I mean, Lost Ark Guardians are based off Monster Hunter. The flares there were also dog shit. Well, yeah, I mean, that's because like in Lost Ark, I don't want to play Monster Hunter. I'm playing Lost Ark. Like, I think that a lot of the things that that Lost Ark has, like with Guardians, I think they're stupid. Like, you should be able to see the health of the Guardian. The reason why is because the health bar shows you, I don't even care about the percentage. I just think that there should be a health bar because there are debuffs on a boss that players are expected to play around. So you're just taking information away that the game is designed around you having. I think it's stupid. But yeah, just mod health bar. You can't. I think that's basically cheating, you know. But yeah, I as I said, I've really enjoyed this game a lot, and I fully intend on playing it. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna play the entire fucking game. Like, I don't know, maybe. Fuck, maybe, right? I mean, my plan is to play the whole game. I'll tell you guys this. I want to play the entire game. Yeah, I want to finish everything. Now, I might not do every single boss on stream. Maybe I'm doing other stuff in like 3 weeks, and so I don't do one boss. But I would want to save a lot of the big key moments for stream so people could watch it.